Paul Brodeur. It is my honor and my pleasure to be mayor of the great city of Melrose. And I'm very excited this evening to welcome you all to Melrose's third annual Juneteenth flag-raising ceremony. Give yourselves all a round of applause for being here. So I want to begin, as we often do, by extending my deepest gratitude to our community members, elected officials, MMTV, the folks that are always very generous in covering these events, the members of my DEI task force, and honored guests who have joined us here today, as well as the entire North Shore Juneteenth Association, its members, and founder and president, Nicole McLean. Thank you for your continued partnership with the City of Melrose, for helping us increase awareness of Juneteenth and educate our community about the significance of this important holiday. And above all, we thank you for your work to dismantle racism and build connections throughout the entirety of the North Shore. I will say briefly, by way of editorial comment that is not in my notes, that I think this community, like many communities, kind of has a choice to make. And what I mean by that is racism and inequality is real. I don't think that is a secret to anyone. But when communities confront this, they really have two choices. You can be comfortable and kind of hope the problem goes away or that other things will overwhelm it. Or you can recognize that this conversation and addressing systemic inequality is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, but that is not an excuse, in my opinion, for inaction or for failure to confront these very real issues. We are not going to make progress if we are not prepared to make people feel uncomfortable. End of editorial comment. So, Juneteenth, also known as Emancipation Day or Freedom Day, represents the end of slavery in the United States. Despite Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation taking effect on January 1st, 1863, hundreds of thousands of black people continued to be enslaved in the United States. I think we all know that the Emancipation Proclamation did not cover everyone. And it was not until Union soldiers delivered the news of the abolition of slavery in Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865, that the last group of enslaved black people in the United States was freed. The following year, on June 19th, 1866, the first official Juneteenth celebrations took place in Texas, of all places. That is a short kind of recollection of the holidays. Now let's talk about the intention of this holiday and this ceremony right here in Melrose today in the 21st century. We, the City of Melrose, my office and the Human Rights Commission, and so many of our residents intend to create programming and events within our community that increase inclusivity for our black and brown community, a population that continues to grow in Melrose, and a community we want to thrive here in partnership with the entire community. Juneteenth is known as an African-American holiday. However, I want to stress that it is an American holiday, a quintessentially American holiday, in the same way that the 4th of July or Independence Day is a uniquely American holiday. It serves to remember and honor our history, both good and bad, and our freedom and our aspiration for freedom. John F. Kennedy, the late president, once said, "Those who look only to the past or the present are certain to miss the future." By celebrating Juneteenth, we celebrate our past, our here and now, and with that intention, reshape a better future. Our city is now and will continue to be open to multiculturalism, consistent with our aspiration to be one community open to all. And we demonstrate this commitment with Juneteenth, with our Dance for Community event, with our Pride Month festivities, our Iftar event, MLK Day, and our overall dedication, our struggle really, to continuing to work toward dismantling systemic racism, and as demonstrated in our current work to update our city's policies and procedures using a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is the thing our city aspires to stands for today, will work for tomorrow, and that, my friends, is why we are here today. Juneteenth is a celebration, maybe not only of when enslaved people were emancipated, but when the last remaining enslaved people of Texas learned of their freedom over 2 years after Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Today, we as a city acknowledge that celebration and the impact our nation's legacy of slavery continues to have on our American community. It is important to recognize the unjust suffering the Black community has endured, and it is equally important for us who are outside of that community to witness, appreciate, and make space for Black joy, Black success, and Black liberation. And that is why we are continuing this tradition and this celebration here in Melrose. I want to invite up our first speaker. Our first speaker is a reverend of the Zion Baptist Church in Lynn, Massachusetts, where he serves as a leader and guide to youth and oversees ministries related to youth and young adults. He is passionate about resolving systemic racism and publicly acts on his belief in that cause. He participates in speaking engagements, records videos, and organizes and speaks at demonstrations. In June of 2021, he led a rally against systemic racism that moved through several North Shore communities. He has also started expanding his work to include advocacy for the queer, immigrant, and low-income communities. Please join me in welcoming back to Melrose, Reverend Andre Bennett.
I'll keep your notes. Melrose, good evening.
Good evening.
Somewhere around 1618 to 1619, they loaded my foreparents into the belly of some ships. They didn't care too much about the health and safety conditions that they would have to endure. And they set out on a months-long trek to the New World. And sometime in 1619, we landed on the shores of this New World. But before we landed on the shores of this New World, many of my foreparents didn't make it. Many of them died from starvation and diseases of all kinds and sorts. From poor circulation, no air to breathe. The ocean hosts their bones and their bodies. But some of them made it to this New World. And when you look at those of us today, it is the strength and the fortitude of those who made it to this New World that flows through our bodies today. We got here and we were forced to work for free. We built an entire empire that we were never allowed to partake in. They tore our families apart. They sold us. They stripped us of our names and our religions. They destroyed our bodies and raped our women. They sold our children and maimed our men. They did everything to break us. But strength runs through our vein and our blood. And so we made it. And we continued to till the soil, and we continued to build this empire. And after 200 plus years, somebody said, this is not fair. We need to let these people at least get to choose what names they give their children. And so the Declaration of Independent Emancipation was signed. But somewhere down south, they still didn't get the message that we could now choose where we worship, when we worship, how we worship, what we worship, who we worship, what our names should be, where our children should sleep at nights. But 2 years later, somebody carried the news down to Texas. And on the 19th of June, 1865, we got some kind of freedom. But here we are in 2023, still not free. Yes, we celebrate Juneteenth, but we still aren't free. You want me to tell you how I know we still aren't free? My sister Breonna Taylor couldn't sleep peacefully in her bed. We're not free. You want me to tell you how I know we're not free? Just recently, a young boy, 9 years old, was playing in a park next door when somebody thought that he didn't belong there. She took a woman, and a woman took his iPad and broke it, threw it at him, and called him all kinds of names. When he went for his mother, she fired a gun through her doors and murdered his mother in cold blood. That's how I know we're still not free today. Nina Simone said, I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all the bars holding me. I wish I could say all the things I should say them loud, say them clear, so the old round world could hear. Sister Liz Wright penned a song. She said, I don't know how my mother walked her troubles down. My mother is right here. Wave your hand, mommy. She said, I don't know how my father stood his ground. I don't know how my people survived slavery. But she said, I do remember. That's why I believe. I do remember that my mother walked her troubles out, even when this country told her that she was nobody, even when she didn't have the right to exercise her votes. As my mother walked her troubles out, my father stood his ground. When they whooped him, he stood his ground. When they beat him, he stood his ground. When they said he was only 3/5 human being, he stood his ground. She said, I remember, that's why I believed. And it is that belief that brought me here today. It is that belief why I'm standing here screaming not at you, but at the wider community. It is that belief that someday these United States of America will love my daughter and my son that currently serve in the military the way they love this country. It is that belief that someday we too will no longer be 3/5 human being, but considered full human beings. It is that belief that when we stand and march, you understand that we're not marching for better anything. We're not marching for better housing. We're not marching for better schooling. We're not marching for better policing. We're marching for equal housing. We're marching for equal schooling. We're marching for equal policing. We are marching for equal rights. The only reason it is considered better when we say it, the only reason why some people consider it better, Mr. Mayor, is because they themselves wouldn't live in the conditions that they're forcing us to live in. That's why they consider it better. The only reason they consider it better when we talk about schooling for our kids is because they wouldn't send their children to that school. That's why they consider it better. But for us, we're not asking for better. We're asking for equality. We're asking for liberty. We're asking for justice. And when they said all, it includes us. Understand that while we have come, and we're in an election cycle, can I put my glasses in your thing? We're in an election cycle, and we're having all kinds of conversation. And it surprises me that people would think and dare to say, why can't we just satisfy? Look how far we've come. Somebody dear said we had a black president. Now we have a black vice president. We've had, something like 4, 5, 6 in total black U.S. senators. We have 1 black sheriff somewhere. Why can't we be satisfied? That's because if you give 10 black people, put 10 black people somewhere, and take away all the power that they have, it doesn't do anything for us. It does nothing for us. Dr. Martin Luther King said, power without love is reckless and abusive. I want to say that again so Melrose, you can hear me. Power without love, it is reckless and abusive. And good God, we see reckless and abusive power all over this country today. We see reckless and abusive power. It is recklessness and abuse that want to look at women today and tell them that you don't get to choose what you do with your body, that 9 people get to tell you how you treat your body. And let me tell you something, be not fooled. The reason why this is a conversation is because it affects primarily women of color in this country. Hello, somebody. So don't sit in your little bubble and think that we're all equal. We're not all equal. We're not on the same trajectory, because you can drive through Melrose and feel completely okay. If I drive through Melrose sometimes at certain hours, I guarantee you I'm gonna get pulled over, because it's happened before. And not only get pulled over, but get pulled over and ask if I need help. If I needed help, I would have pulled you over. And that's what I want you to get. If I need help, I would pull you over. But if you have to pull me over to ask me if I need help, you know what you're telling me? You don't belong here. Why are you here? So we're not equal. We've seen reckless and abusive love. When we try to educate our children, they call it critical race theory, and they're banning it in schools. They're removing books. They don't want to talk about Rosa Parks having to sit at the sit at the back of the bus and choosing not to give up her seat someday so that a little black boy like me with dreadlocks and an accent from Jamaica can stand before white Melrose and tell a group of people that we who believe in freedom, we cannot rest until it comes. It is not because I love, and I'm going to shut up soon, I promise. I'm a Baptist preacher. You give me a mic, I'm going to talk. It is not because I love the excitement why I keep doing this. I came here 15 years ago. And let me just say this, because I do advocate for the immigrant community. Not because we have an accent, we look different, we sound different, doesn't mean that we don't bring the same kind of substance. Many of us are coming from our countries. We are doctors and lawyers, educators and researchers. The reason why we come here is because in many instances, this country, at one point or another, you probably won't have me back, but that's all right. I still like y'all. At one point or another, interfered in our government and destabilized our country, and so the living conditions in our country is no longer tenable, and so we have to seek to live. That's why some of us came here. I shared this with the folks in Swampscott. I sit not on one, not on two, but on 3 PhDs that I didn't purchase anywhere. I went to school, I did researches, I wrote dissertations, and I defended them successfully. And I get pulled over with my 16-year-old daughter, my 20-year-old son, sitting in my car by a young man who just graduated police academy, and I'm addressed as boy. In this here Massachusetts, in this here 2000s. I'm not talking about the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. Power without love is reckless and abusive. But Dr. King didn't stop there. This is my favorite part of that quote. Dr. King says, love without power is sentimental and anemic. Love without power is sentimental and anemic. And let me just talk to you for about 2 more minutes that I have about the love without power, the sentimental and anemic kind of love. I'm not saying it happens here in Melrose, but it is having a DEI department, but there is no power, no agency within that DEI department to do anything. That's sentimental and anemic kind of love. I'm not saying you do it, Mr. Mayor. That's sentimental and anemic kind of love. You want me to tell you a little bit about sentimental and anemic kind of love? It's erecting a Juneteenth banner on Juneteenth because it's the right thing. It feels like the right thing to do, but there's no person of color in your city government. Hello, somebody. There's no person of color sitting on your school board. Hello, somebody. There's no person. You won't give up a little bit of your comfort to ensure that the people of color in Melrose feel like they are a part of the community. That is sentimental and anemic kind of love. If you love me, if you're standing with me, give me some power, give me some agency, give me some authority to do what I gotta do. And understand this, and I promise I'm done. Understand this. Allyship doesn't mean that you take over and tell me what is best for me. You don't know what is best for me. You don't live in my skin. I'll share one story with you. I know 2 young men that are youth that I have mentored and counseled with. 2 of them, one went to UNH, University of New Hampshire, and one went to Dartmouth College. Hello, somebody. One's black, one's white. They both graduated with a bachelor's degree in business administration. They both interviewed for a salesperson job at Oracle in Burlington, Massachusetts. They both got offered the job. The only difference is one of them got offered $65,000, while the other one got offered $80,000 as their starting rate. The only difference between the 2 young men, one is black and one is white. white and you don't gotta guess who got offered $80,000. Hello, somebody. We are talking about not being equal. Allyship doesn't mean that you smile with me and tell me what you think is right for me. Allyship means get out of the way, help me find the resources, and give me the opportunity to lead the work. Those closest to the pain should lead the work. If you are ally, give us some power. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes. God bless you.
All right, I'm back. And Reverend, I want you to know I only have 3 fewer PhDs than you. Thank you so much for those words, and really in the work you do throughout the North Shore, and particularly with our young people, because that is where the change comes. That's where it has to be built. That's where it has to take root. And you're doing that work every day. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is the president of the Melrose City Council. At least that's by night, by Jay. She's the chief of staff at the Massachusetts Office for Victim Assistance, a state agency that supports victims of violent crime. Please welcome to give the greetings of the City Council, Jennifer Grigoritis.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. After that powerful message, I will be very brief. It's an honor to be speaking to you. Sorry, that's the problem with being 5 feet tall. To help celebrate Juneteenth here in the City of Melrose. I want to thank Mayor Brodeur for bringing this celebration to our community. There is a quote about how change happens and more work needs to be done. I think that is very true for all of us here. If we truly want to live up to our motto of being one community open to all, we all need to collectively acknowledge our whole history, as was so powerfully just stated, however uncomfortable it may be, and learn from it. Acknowledging this holiday, while celebratory in nature, is also an important acknowledgement of our very imperfect past. I also believe Juneteenth is about hope. And so today, may we reflect on and seek to fully understand and to teach, and I'm really grateful to see the Melrose Public Library here today with resources, our shared history with hope for a better future, and may we challenge ourselves to be better and do better together as one community. Thank you all for being here.
I do want to acknowledge our new chief, Chief Kevin Follier. He's been on the job about 6 months now, and is having a tremendous impact on our community, and the men and women of the Melrose Fire Department also joining us here today. And I do want to, again, President Grigoritis mentioned it, but the library. The library is at so many of these events to support the work, and we already talked about it a little bit, but you know what is happening in a lot of the country where certain members of the public think it is a worthwhile investment of their time to limit the resources, to limit knowledge, to limit what our residents have access to in terms of information. That is not going to happen in this city. And I want to thank them for being here today. Our next speaker was born in South Africa and came to the United States with his family when he was only 12 years old. His experience growing up in the segregated society of South Africa grounded him with a deep sense of social justice, and he has been outspoken throughout his career on issues of race, gender, and equity. He has championed, in particular, educational equity and led the fight to pass the Student Opportunity Act in Massachusetts in 2019, a landmark piece of legislation to ensure that every child in Massachusetts has access to a high-quality public education. Senator Lewis and I had the privilege of collaborating with Senator Lewis in 2018 to raise the state's minimum wage to $15 an hour and to create the most robust paid family and medical leave state program in the country. Please welcome my friend, Senator Jason Lewis.
thank you, Mayor Brodeur. Thank you to you and the Melrose Human Rights Commission for organizing this very significant Juneteenth flag raising. Thank you to all of you for making time to celebrate with us today. And happy Juneteenth, everybody. Happy Juneteenth. President Obama said, quote, that Juneteenth has never been a celebration of victory or an acceptance of the way things are. It's a celebration of progress. It's an affirmation that despite the most painful parts of our history, change is possible and there is still so much more work to do. Centuries of racial oppression, exploitation, and discrimination in our country have resulted in deep and persistent racial inequities in all facets of our society. Vast racial wealth gaps, housing and school segregation, health disparities, environmental injustices, and more. You don't have to look very far, just take some very recent examples from the city of Boston, our neighbors. A 2015 study found that the median net worth of a white family was almost $250,000, while for a black family in Boston, it was just $8. $8. Earlier this year, a report from the Boston Public Health Commission showed that there is a 23-year difference in life expectancy between two Boston neighborhoods that are 2 miles apart. In Back Bay, where most of the people are white, the average life expectancy is 92 years. In the area around Nubian Square in Roxbury, where most of the residents are people of color, the average life expectancy is 69 years. To build a more just and equitable society, I believe we need to do 3 things. First, we have to face our history truthfully. We have to educate ourselves and our children about the history of racial injustice in our own communities and our nation. We have to recognize and acknowledge that white supremacy and systemic racism are deeply embedded in our institutions. Second thing we need to do is we need to pursue policies at the local level, at the state level, and at the national level we need to pursue policies at the municipal level, the state level, and at the national level that address social and economic injustice, especially policies that advance greater racial equity. We have made some progress here in Massachusetts with, for example, as the mayor mentioned, the passage of the Student Opportunity Act, some significant criminal justice and policing reforms, a much greater focus on health equity and on environmental justice. But there is so much more work, policy work, that we need to do. And again, this is all of our responsibilities, our cities and towns, in our state, and in Washington. And the third thing that I believe that we need to do is that we must engage in serious conversations, again at the local level, the state level, and the national level, about reparations. Communities across the country, including some here in Massachusetts, the town of Amherst is a great example. You may have been following what they've been doing. City of Boston's another example. Evanston, Illinois was the trailblazer here. I encourage you to look at what they've done and are doing. These are communities that have launched reparations efforts. It's hard work. There are no easy solutions, and the right approach in one community may look different in another community. But I urge us here in Melrose and at the state level to begin this process now. Thank you all very much. It's an honor to be a speaker, and happy Juneteenth.
So I am pleased to introduce our next speaker, who has dedicated a professional career to public service. Her very first job, presumably out of college, was as a 7th grade public school teacher in an economically disadvantaged neighborhood of Atlanta. After graduating from Harvard Law School, another thing I didn't do, she worked as a judicial clerk in the federal courts and as a consultant for state school districts, colleges and universities, and nonprofit organizations in efforts to improve outcomes for children and students. Please welcome my longtime friend and my successor at the State House, Kate Lipper-Garabedian.
Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to get to continue to participate in this special event and be with all of you tonight. 3 years ago, in one of my very first votes as your state representative, I was incredibly proud to join a unanimous legislature in making Juneteenth, a day that for too long had lacked formal official recognition, a state holiday. And I'm equally proud to represent a city that has spearheaded such a vibrant annual celebration. I want to thank everyone who's been involved in this, the North Shore Juneteenth Association, Mayor Brodeur and your great team at City Hall, the Human Rights Commission, and everybody who's here today. As I've shared with you the last 2 years, and many of you may remember, I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital of the Confederacy. And juxtaposed against that, I was a student in the Richmond City Public Schools, where for the first 9 years of my education, I had more black classmates than white classmates, more black teachers than white teachers. Both of my school principals were black. And yet I cannot remember a single lesson, a project, or a mention of Juneteenth. It was the same when I was a teacher in Atlanta, arguably now the capital of the New South, where nearly all of my students in 7th grade were black. And we talked about metaphors and similes and rap poetry. We read books that were set in historic times like the Holocaust. We debated the Patriot Act that was signed into law one of those years. But Juneteenth was not in the textbooks. It wasn't in the state standards. It wasn't in the curriculum that was taught. I'm sure that many of my classmates and later my students did celebrate Juneteenth with their churches and their civic organizations in their neighborhoods, but we didn't do it together. It wasn't officially acknowledged, and that was a real loss for them, but it was also a loss for me, and it was a loss for all of us. Juneteenth is a moment that should be communally and officially recognized for everyone, and I'm glad we're doing it again today. The Juneteenth flag we're going to raise in a few minutes is a very meaningful symbol. It's a symbol of a moment in our nation's ongoing struggle to live up to the principles on which it was founded, the celebration of a war to end the system of slavery. But we know symbols aren't sufficient. We've heard that here today. By most measures, life expectancy, educational achievement, lifetime earnings, home ownership, incarceration. Just this week, a horrific story about maternal health outcomes, right? From a woman who won a gold medal for our country and died in her home alone, pregnant. Terrible. There are major gaps between white citizens and black and brown citizens, and they remain. It's our responsibility and our obligation and our opportunity to make this flag and Juneteenth actionable by contemplating what we as a community and as a country, what we want to be and where we want to go. Let's take this opportunity to engage in critically important conversations in our homes and schools, among our classmates, our parents, our colleagues, and our neighbors. And when it comes to state government, these conversations can lead to tangible change. Over the last 3 years, I've seen firsthand an ongoing integrated analysis of proposed bills across all issues: climate change, healthcare, education, through the lens of racial justice. We hear it in committee testimony every day. We hear it in advocacy efforts. I engage in that in conversations with my colleagues. I'm proud to be a member of a legislature that has advanced statewide policies aimed at moving us toward a more just and inclusive Commonwealth. A prime example is the Crown Act, signed into law less than a year ago in July, banning discrimination on the basis of hairstyle in schools and public places. This law is a credit to those difficult conversations, civic engagement, and advocacy of neighbors just to our south in Malden, Deanna and Maya Cook. Deanna and Maya were disciplined for styling their hair in box braids when they were attending their public school. Their efforts against a discriminatory dress code and their courage to have conversations across leadership areas gained traction at the state level, and is an inspiring example of how individual citizens can catalyze a movement. Without their work, Black women and others in the Commonwealth would not have legal protection for their natural hairstyles. Another tangible measure implemented in recent years is the VOTES Act, which has increased access to our ballot box. Voting is the foundational exercise of a free democratic society, and where we see other states around the nation trying to tighten their grip on access to the ballot box, in Massachusetts, we know that communities of color face institutional barriers with longer lines and more difficulty accessing voting. So we've enhanced access through universal vote by mail and longer in-person early voting days. The state's genocide education law and its trust fund that we're investing hundreds of thousands of dollars into every year, which is especially significant to me as an Armenian by marriage, is further evidence of our commitment to grappling with and confronting our history in an effort to advance toward a more just and peaceful world. Just this week, in the space of a personal passion that I have professionally of working for a long time on access and diversity issues in education, Governor Healey established an advisory council for the advancement of representation in education. We're preparing for the Supreme Court's likely decision to strike down the longstanding ability of colleges and universities to consider applicant race when they're building a class, because we know that educational benefits of diversity flow to all students, but we're going to see a very restrictive, regressive opinion likely coming down. So Governor Healey's action sends yet another message that we deeply value diversity, and specifically racial diversity, in all places of the Commonwealth. So in closing, in Juneteenth this year, let us collectively reaffirm our commitment to further action to continue this long progress of our nation toward a more just and a more free society. Thank you.
Turn to the page. So I am beyond excited to introduce our first performer of the evening. He is a writer, a poet, a husband, a father, a teacher, a visual artist, and jazz aficionado. Professionally, he directs elder services for a community center in Medford. On top of his daily responsibilities, he has found the time to publish 5 volumes of poetry, and in 2021, he was named the inaugural Poet Laureate of the City of Medford. All of his experience permeate his poems and poetic stories. He takes contemporary life and faith experiences and translates them into images that engage people in a truly unique way. His life influences include his family, race, culture, and religion. Please welcome the Poet Laureate of Medford, Terry Carter.
First and foremost, I have to remind my friend Nicole never to ever make me speak after Andre Bennett again. He's not a tough act to follow. He's an impossible act to follow. But good evening. I bid you a happy, thoughtful, and reflective pre-Juneteenth, City of Melrose. Let me thank Nicole and North Shore Juneteenth Association Planning Committee for inviting me to take part in your celebration. NSJA is introducing this observance to new communities in the state every year, and I think, and you've heard it from so many folks, this is so very important. My name indeed is Terry E. Carter, and I come from the nearby city of Medford, Massachusetts. Medford, like Melrose, is an old town in the Commonwealth with fond recollections of simpler times and revered traditions. I will freely admit that both of our hometowns are living in a much different world right now, one that is seemingly more tense, more troubled, and more terrifying than many of us can easily remember. Still, to find your town pushing forward to host the celebration of Black history and the recognition of our ongoing journey to a more meaningful American dream is helping my emotional and spiritual well-being more than you might imagine. Yet while this Juneteenth celebration and flag raising is hopeful and forward-looking, it is also symbolic of just how far we have yet to go in facing past demons of race and division in our sister cities, states, and nation. Now, I'm a poet. I've published 5 books of verse. I have one here with me today, but that's neither here nor there. And wherever I speak in public, poetry is one of the prisms through which I share my thoughts, opinions, and insights. Today is no different, so I really hope that there are some poetry lovers out there among you. So, most of the folks who will talk to you about Juneteenth have come to recognize that it's not a destination, it's a journey. So this piece is hopefully appropriately entitled Juneteenth Journey. Did Texas say, not here, not we, when emancipation set us free? Did they buck the trend like a longhorn steer and try to keep their slaves in fear? When the soldiers came to spread the orders, did the Lone Star State defend its borders? Did the slavers draw their Colts and Henrys and press their rights as Texas gentry? Did they say, this war may be over for you, but we're still gray and y'all still blue? That meant Lincoln don't speak for us, so Yankees get or we might cuss. What did their hopeful blacks say? You Negroes will never cross those tracks. We'll never treat you equally. Only in name will you be free. Did they bar the door and douse the lights? Did lynch mob form on warm southern nights? Did they holler about their precious states' rights? Did they gird their loins and prepare for new fights? When the 19th dawned in the old Southwest, were those owners ready for their slaves to be blessed? Were they ready to unlock shackles and cages? Would they ever pay black men, white men wages? In this new day of manumission, could they show any grace or any contrition? Could they finally admit that Father Time was ready to wash off slavery's grime as the soldiers regarded their red-flushed faces? Were they ready to end their former disgraces? Or would they simply nod and smile, then deal with free Negroes Texas style? Would they show just how the West was won with a tightened noose and a triggered gun? Would they shout defiance into the ranks of the Union Army's approaching flanks? What bloody story would black men tell when whites refused to heed the bell? Would this legacy form a violent chapter for history to record thereafter? Or would some cooler heads prevail and jubilant coloreds get out of jail? The answer's written down for us to study here and then discuss. The news was brought to Texas towns as Union soldiers made their rounds. The news was that the war was done, that Northern troops had finally won, their victory certain to assure an end to what all slaves endure. It was not simple, then as now. Race remains a heavy plow, yet still we must commemorate America's final slaver's gate. The end of that Confederacy is a bloody tale of supremacy. The war we thought we'd never see to set the Southland's bondsmen free. Brothers fought against their kin to keep hold of their Negro skin. This country took up violent arms to rid the land of slavery's harms. Now the last shall be the first, as chattel lives have broke the curse. Texas chains may not abide, though hooded Klansmen now may ride. So take good care, my brown-skinned boys. New sorrows may outweigh these joys. June 19th may loose the chains, but freedom comes with greater pains. 150 years has passed since Texas blacks cried, free at last. And yet the curse of race still finds a way to poison hearts and minds. Guard your lives and take good care. History's hate is everywhere. Brown-skinned boys and girls must learn that crosses in the dark still burn. This is the vigil you must keep. Every shut eye can't be asleep. Please be wary and don't relax. Heed the history and learn the facts. The truth recalls both celebration and unpaid debts by this great nation. Juneteenth calls for drums and dance, for good soul food and games of chance. Gather round, strike up the band, as freedom rings across the land. Hug your neighbor and shake a hand, as freedom rings across the land. Juneteenth signals freedom's light, a final end to that dark night. Celebrate community, gather with friends in unity. Hug your neighbors and shake a hand, as freedom rings across the land. Hug your neighbors and shake a hand, as freedom rings across the land. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
It's me again. Right now? Yep. Our next speaker, we don't have a bio for him, my apologies. Keyshawn Little, come on up, my friend.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm not gonna lie, I have been having some rough weeks. Last week I was in a car accident, but after hearing Reverend and Terry come up here and speak, I feel the blood rushing through me that wants me to be here and continue to engage in this tough conversation. Because I feel the blood, I hope y'all blood is pumping too, so I like to engage my audience. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna say, can I proceed? And you're gonna say, yes, indeed, because I gotta check to see if y'all still with me. Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
All right, let's do this. My name is Keyshawn Little. I am from New London, North Carolina. I work as a licensed social worker for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Pray for us. I work for the Department of the Children and Family. At the end of 2019, I was hired as a foster parent recruiter for the department that covers the greater Lynn area. Now that's another conversation because we do need foster homes for the Melrose area, but that's another conversation. I'm a member of the North Shore Juneteenth Association under the leadership of the first Black woman to be council member in Lynn. Let me say that one more time. The first Black woman to be a council member in Lynn, Madam President Nicole McCain. I wish she was here today. Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
All right, let's do this. When I hear the words free slaves, I hear oxymoron. Just like Reverend said, sold to the colonists almost 404 years ago in August 1619, when the first record Africans arrived in Virginia. The years of identity slavery that follow define the DNA of the country that will be formed here. Millions of years of history, identity, culture, and community have been lost as the results of millions of Africans dying at sea during the Middle Passage and the slave trade pandemic. Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
242 years ago, the greatest American of all time worked as a double agent to help George Washington to secure a victory in the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. James Armstead Lafayette was not even free after the war that was fighting for freedom. Just imagine that. You fought for freedom and you still not free. You fought for freedom and you still not free. He wasn't free until 6 years later. He had to go back to slavery. He had to go back to work for his master after he helped secure the war that gave freedom to this country. A Black man who believed in the idea of freedom. The idea of freedom that just like you and I fought for this country, got the information, put his life on the line just for you and I to be here today, was not free for another 6 years. Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
160 years ago, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. The proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within this rebellious state are henceforth shall be free. It declared forever free. Another oxymoron. for more than 3.5 million slaves in the Confederate areas, still in the rebellious against the Union. Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
There is a timeline of unrelentless struggle, which Reverend was talking about. 400 years of slavery, 101 years of segregation, and unceasing years of oppression and so-called freedom. Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
So, we are here today to celebrate not only the freedom of Black Americans, but Black Americans themselves. Juneteenth is a time to take a look at the complex experience that we have lived through, the realization that we have lived and continue to thrive. It's imperative for us in the world to acknowledge who we are. Denied education, denied housing, denied life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, yet here we are, still becoming scientists, engineers, politicians, 3 PhDs, graduating from various educational institutions. Here we are, navigating systematic oppression the best way we can to continue to have culture, community, and purpose. Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
So, one of the goals of the North Shore Juneteenth Association is to educate the community, to come out here and about why Juneteenth is important and why this holiday should be celebrated. 158 years ago, following General Granger's Juneteenth arrival in Galveston, Texas, to inform 250,000 of enslaved people that slavery, as they knew it, was over, to tell them to go back to their owner and wait. Many continued to work for their masters because they had no idea what their newfound freedom and lack of sense of identity or community. Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
This holiday commemorates the 2-year delay of enslaved Black men, women, and children in Galveston, Texas, experienced before being notified of their freedom. When the Emancipation Proclamation was declared on January 1st, 1863, many slave owners were making sure their free slaves were not hearing about their freedom and were sending them down deep south to Texas to continue slavery. Even after the announcement of the Emancipation Proclamation for the slaves in Texas, slavery wasn't over. Kentucky and Delaware was continuing doing slavery until 1865, December 1865, after the amendments were passed. The 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments were passed. Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
So when the Ranger, General Gordon Granger, arrived in Texas, he gave this order. The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with the proclamation of the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. Oxymoron. This involves absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. Oxymoron. And the connections henceforth existing between them becomes between employer and a hired labor. Oxymoron. The free men are advised to remain quietly at the present home and work for wages. They are informed they will not be allowed to collect a military post, and they will not be supported in the ideas elsewhere. Imagine hearing of your freedom and being able to own that. Imagine knowing that as a person you have been set free from the early mornings to the late nights of hard labor, or that your body is all of a sudden yours, that no one has the right to force themselves onto you. That is the news, is cause for a celebration. Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
However, the order contained the message of freedom, but also contained a message of entrapment. Will Black Americans be supported in their lawful rights to be free? Juneteenth has been celebrated annually on June 19th in various parts of the United States since 1867. Juneteenth 1865 was the beginning for what is next for Black Americans' identity, culture, and community. The day was recognized as a federal holiday June 17, 2021, when President Biden signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act into law. So, why Juneteenth? Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
Juneteenth is important to hold the message of freedom and hope. The day symbolized the idea of slavery in America to be over. The star on the flag that you're about to see represents freedom for African Americans in all 50 states. Freedom and hope is what enslaved Black Americans held on to. They knew they were free and that the first step was all that mattered. The full staircase was of no consequence. They were ready to take it one step at a time. Again, they were ready to take one step at a time. So when you see people protest, as Reverend was saying, they're not here to say that, hey, you did me wrong. They're here to say they're not here to say you did me wrong. They're here to take what was supposed to be given to each and every one of us. Each and every one of us has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. No matter what it looks like, you all have that right, no matter what's on your background. Y'all do realize once people become felonies, once people become a felon, because it's easy in America to become a felon. A lot of states, they take away your rights. They take away your rights to vote. They take away your power to be a citizen in this country. So what they basically doing is, hey, we're putting you back in the chains that we thought we got you out of those chains all those years. So again, it's very important that they were ready to take it one step at a time. So once they knew they were free, they were ready to build community, build culture, build an identity, build a sense of purpose. And every time they were attacked, they still stood just for me to be able to be here today to speak among you. So again, can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
The burst that you're going to see on the flag that surrounds the star of the flag symbolize the new beginning for Blacks in America, a commitment to identity, culture, and community. The arc symbolizes a new horizon, the opportunity and promises that lays ahead for Black Americans. Even though I don't feel free yet, I feel our power, our strength, our resilience, our intelligence, Dr. Reverend, and our beauty, just as the world does. Although the blood, the sweat, and tears of my ancestors are proof of a debt unpaid, the red, white, and blue, that same flag that y'all represent as Americans, the same flag on the Juneteenth flag, symbolize that Blacks are Americans. As Americans, we pay into this corporation institution, if you will, because it's lawful to do so. Can I proceed?
Yes, indeed.
Today, in the spirit of Juneteenth, we want to foster unity and our commitment of the work ahead. With unity, it shows our power, our strength, our resilience, our intelligence, and beauty in how we maintain our identity, culture, and community. Let us celebrate how far we have come, but never lose sight of how far we have to go. So North Shore Juneteenth Association wishes you all a happy Juneteenth. So in the importance of recognizing North Shore Juneteenth Association, it's very important that each and every one of us find ways to invest. Find ways to invest resources and energy into those organizations that are standing up for these causes. Prime example, North Shore Juneteenth Association. Definitely follow us on social media at NSJuneteenth or go to our website, nsjuneteenth.com. Support our mission by donating your time, treasure, and talents. Tomorrow, because Melrose is not that far from Lynn, we are having a Juneteenth celebration right there at the Lynn Museum. Please come out, enjoy, fellowship, have a great time. Enjoy this freedom that we celebrate, but at the same time, remember the work ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Kishan. Now, that was terrific information, and thank you for your passion. Thank you for your work on behalf of the kids of the Commonwealth. That is no easy task, and I suspect you don't get thanked one whole heck of a lot, but on behalf of my colleagues in the legislature and the families throughout the Commonwealth that you serve, thank you for that important work. Now it is time for the flag raising. All right. We have two very special Melrose residents here tonight, a dynamic father and son duo, Michael and Joe Phillips, who are going to raise the Juneteenth flag. Michael, raise your hand and give it a wave. That's Michael. Michael is going into the 7th grade at the Acera School in Winchester, where he excels in science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. He plays soccer, enjoys writing computer code, and watch out for him because you can see by his t-shirt, he is a 3rd-degree junior black belt. Somewhat incredibly, Michael also finds the time to run a year-round charity dedicated to raising money and collecting coats and other clothing for children of inner-city schools, including Malden and Lynn. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about Michael's work, he's going to be sticking around for a while should the skies not open up. Please grab him and say hello and ask how you can help.
I think you made a mistake about his grades. So you said 7th grade?
I did.
No, he is not.
His dad, Joe, is also here. I think the best thing that he probably does is raises Michael, but he is also a member of the Human Rights Commission and chair of my DEI Advisory Task Force. Joe is also the chair of the board for Pathways Adult Education and Training of Lynn, Massachusetts, and president of his own business, Evergreen Retirement Services, through which he provides financial and estate planning services. Most importantly, he is passionate about life, his family, equity, and humanity. So, you will note, somewhat unusually, that our flags are at half-mast today, and that is because Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey ordered Massachusetts flags in Massachusetts, I should say, to be lowered to half-mast because of the recent death of a man named David Bartley, who was a longtime leader in the legislature and in the community college scene. That is the reason why the Juneteenth flag will not be going permanently affixed all the way up the flagpole. So Joe and Michael, take it away.
Yep.
All right. I misread the note. I thought it said Janie Davis is not singing.
Oh,
That is not what it says.
Oh.
It says Janie Davis is singing, not Tanya.
If you'd like me to, would you like me to?
Let's do it. Let's go.
May I?
Yeah, of course you can.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I've never stopped a mayor before. I'm going places. Okay. I'm telling you, yes! Somebody call my mom. Okay, all right. If you know the words to Lift Every Voice and Sing, the Black National Anthem, please feel free to sing along. So now you guys can. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling seas. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod. Felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our people sighed. Oh, we have come, it's a hymnal, over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come, treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. But out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on our way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in our path, we pray. Oh, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. Thank you. Thank you. Go louder because y'all were waiting for clapping. Let's woo! Thank you. Woo! Look at us all here today. One people, different colors. One people, different colors. That's Lucky Doobie. I put you on. Google it. Lucky Doobie. All right. Thank you so much. I'm Janie David. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, I only screwed up that twice. That's not too bad. That's not too bad. Real quickly before we bring up our keynote speaker, because sometimes I have these little epiphanies, and Keyshawn mentioned it, and the Reverend mentioned Lynn, Senator Lewis mentioned Nubian Square, and I think it is a wonderful thing to invite our friends from the Juneteenth Association to come to Melrose and visit us, but I think we can do better. And what I mean by that is it is also on us to go outside of our own borders and go to a Lynn, go to a Nubian Square. Honestly, one of the most diverse communities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is about a mile that way, Malden, Massachusetts. And sometimes we talk a lot about what should we do, and we try to think big. Well, sometimes the answer is just take a walk. Just take a walk and say hello, to give that handshake, give that hug, tell a little bit about yourself, learn a little bit about the folks that are right next door. And I think that's a terrific way to make some progress. So thank you for that idea and for sparking me a little bit. So I think we do have the proclamation, but I do want to be respectful of our keynote speaker's time. So pardon me if you feel like I'm rushing through it. I don't mean to. But this is our Juneteenth proclamation for the City of Melrose. Whereas on June 19th, 1865, 2.5 years after President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, Union soldiers led by General Gordon Granger landed at Galveston, Texas, with the news that the war between the states had ended and that enslaved people were now free. And whereas General Granger announced to the residents of Texas, the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that of employer and hired labor. Whereas the first Juneteenth celebration was held in Texas in 1866, and since then, Juneteenth has been celebrated in communities across the United States, providing an opportunity to mark the emancipation of enslaved people. And whereas on this day, in hundreds of communities across the country, people of all races, all nationalities, and all religions join hands to acknowledge the painful history and lasting systemic impact of slavery and racial injustice in the United States. Juneteenth is an opportunity to recommit ourselves to the goal of creating a more equal and just society, and that effort should and must continue today and into the future. Therefore, I, Paul Brodeur, Mayor of Melrose, do proclaim June 19th, 2023 to be Juneteenth Independence Day, and urge all Melrosians to take cognizance of this event and participate fittingly in its observance. And if you have not had the opportunity, please take the opportunity to sign the proclamation. It will also be, I believe, at the public library for the next few days, and take that opportunity. So, thank you, Madam President. Thank you. And now, without much further ado, I am honored and delighted to introduce our ceremony's keynote speaker, who will help us close out tonight's program. And I do want to note this would not have happened with my staff, including Lysandra and Lily. Lily, we're glad you're still here. So, a resident of Malden and professor of history at Salem State University, our keynote speaker teaches courses in United States history, including African American history. He is the author of several books, including the upcoming biography of Martin Luther King Jr. entitled Martin Luther King Jr., A Life in American History. He is an expert on 20th century American history, including, importantly, African American history, which is American history, the African diaspora history, the Black Panther Party of Connecticut, the civil rights movement, and health politics in Harlem and New York City. Please welcome to Melrose and to this podium, Professor Jamie Wilson. Professor.
Good evening. Good evening. Can you all hear me? Yes, sir. I'm not particularly good at microphones, but my voice, if you've ever been in my classes, you know my voice will carry. So I'm a historian of the African American experience. So today, I want to talk a little bit about African American history. So, thank you all for having me. I bring you unofficial greetings from Malden. I live right down the street. My kids go down to the BB school. I go to the Melrose Y. So, thanks for having me. In his remarks at the signing of the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, President Biden said that, quote, Juneteenth is the day in which we remember the moral stain, the terrible toll that slavery took on the country and continues to take. So this evening, for a few minutes, I'd like to talk about and remember that stain. The enslavement of West African peoples began in North America in 1565, when Spanish colonists brought enslaved Africans to present-day St. Augustine, Florida. In 1619, there was a turning point in the English-speaking colonies when Governor George Yeardley and Abraham Piercy in present-day Fort Monroe in Hampton, Virginia, negotiated an agreement with the captain of the White Lion, an English ship which had seized Angolan slaves from Spanish slave traders. Yeardley and Piercy traded food for the Angolan slaves and effectively entered the English-speaking North American colonies into the transatlantic slave trade, a trade in which European merchants exchanged manufactured goods for enslaved Africans, whom they shipped to the Americas for New World commodities, which they then shipped back to European markets. As England's North American colonies developed in the 17th century, slavery took root in every colony, including Massachusetts. We New Englanders take great pride in our abolitionist spirit that was so pervasive in the late 18th and early 19th century. But we forget that Massachusetts was the first colony to legally sanction chattel slavery in 1641. For 150 years, as the frontier moved farther west, slavery moved with it. The decades after the Revolutionary War brought with it the manumission of large numbers of Black Americans in northern and upper South states. Vermont abolished slavery in 1777. In 1780, Pennsylvania began a gradual abolition of slavery. The Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled that slavery was incompatible with the state's new constitution in 1783. However, despite the revolutionary fervor, these calls for democracy and declarations of equality, our founding fathers and mothers protected slavery in their own personal interest. Again, as this frontier moves further west, slavery moved with it, so that the number of enslaved people in the United States grew from roughly 700,000 in 1790 to approximately 3.9 million in 1860. New slave states entered the Union. Kentucky, 1792. Tennessee, 1796. Louisiana, 1812. Mississippi, 1817. Alabama, 1819. Missouri, 1821. Arkansas, 1836. Florida, and Texas, 1845. In the 1840s and the 1850s, as the U.S. gained territories in the Southwest, from Mexico, from the Oregon Country, from Great Britain, there's this growing anti-slavery movement, and it intensifies, and this new Republican Party decides to seek to halt the expansion of slavery in those territories. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, you will recall, called for settlers of those territories to decide whether they would be a free state or a slave state. So by 1860, when Abraham Lincoln is elected president, the nation is at a tipping point. And even though Lincoln said and maintained that he had little authority to regulate or abolish slavery in states where it already existed, 11 Southern states committed treason when they seceded from the Union in late 1860 and the opening months of 1861 for fear that they would lose their dominance over Black people and slavery would end. When the Civil War begins with the attack of Fort Sumter in April 1861, it causes Lincoln to rethink his position on slavery and the nation's position on slavery. And that evaluation eventually leads to the Emancipation Proclamation. Our brother already read that today, so I'm not going to belabor the point on that one. But I do think that it's important to state or remember, as he says, that on the first day of January, in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within states or designated parts of a state, the people whereof shall be in rebellion against the United States, shall be thenceforward, and forever free. It goes on, this Emancipation Proclamation, to list those states in open rebellion. It does not list the states of Delaware, my home state. It does not list Kentucky. It does not list Maryland. It does not list Missouri, border states, i.e. slave states that remained loyal to the Union. So slavery continued. There is this myth, so I want to tell you all right now, slavery does not end with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Slavery does not end when Granger comes in to Galveston, Texas. By the way, he did not come in on a horse. In fact, he did not stand in front of an eager crowd and gave it. No, what happens is the myth that African Americans in Texas did not know about the proclamation, or that Texas was somehow this frontier land where the proclamation had not reached until 1865 is false. Lincoln used a revolutionary technology. Anyone want to guess what it was? It was a telegraph. He sent all this information out about the war, sent telegrams, received telegrams, and on that day, on January 1st, 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation took effect, he sent that information to Texas. Texas got it. They knew it. More than 100 Texas newspapers mentioned the Emancipation Proclamation between 1862 and 1864. You might notice that I'm looking at you. Don't be offended. When I teach, I make eye contact with people. More than 100 Texas newspapers mention the Emancipation Proclamation between 1862 and 1864. White slave owners knew about the proclamation, as did enslaved blacks. Blacks in Texas, as in other places of the South, had complicated communications networks unknown to many whites, including their enslavers. The reason that people were still in bondage in Texas in the summer of 1865 is because local leaders and the Texas Confederate Constitution prohibited manumission. That's why slave owners from Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas took their slaves to that frontier. In fact, it's been suggested that around between 1862 and 1865, the enslaved population in the state of Texas increased by about 50,000. That was not by natural production. They brought people in. Granger arrives with his Union soldiers, many of whom were African American. It is a fiction to say that his primary objective was to go into Texas and free blacks. It was not. His primary objective was to restore Union order in Texas. To restore the Union in Texas, you have to enforce the Emancipation Proclamation. There were 5 orders when he arrived. 5. The Juneteenth order is number 3. So black people were not at the top of his list. We've already read, the mayor has already read his Juneteenth statements. I'm not going to belabor the point, but it is important to note that they are informed not by, we have this image, as I said before, of these eager slaves. Oh, look, the Union is here. Let us go down to the town center and hear what Granger has. That didn't happen. Instead, it's posted around town. It's posted in the newspaper. So June 19th, the day that the third order was heard, becomes this Juneteenth order. It's a holiday by black Texans created to commemorate the day that enslaved black men and women in Galveston received official notification of their freedom. But more importantly, they received official notification. More importantly, they receive official notification and the promise that the Army and the government would enforce that freedom. It doesn't mean that every black person in Texas learned about it that day. If you lived in the countryside, you would not have heard it. It would take a couple of days for that information to get to you. It doesn't mean that blacks just up and left their enslavers, but it was nonetheless a life-changing moment for those enslaved and their progeny. If you have not been stripped and put on an auction block, you don't know what I'm talking about. There's a difference between, oh, I'm on an auction block today, and oh, I get to decide what I'm going to do with my life today, right? Throughout the late 19th century, black Galvestonians honored their long-awaited liberation with annual celebrations. As their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren left Texas during the Great Migration of the early 20th century, they took Juneteenth with them. So you would not be surprised in the early 20th century if there were Juneteenth celebrations in Los Angeles or Oakland or Detroit and Chicago. In the mid-20th century, annual Juneteenth celebrations continued throughout Texas, but all but disappeared in other parts of the country until it was revived in the late 1960s. The fact that Juneteenth is a national holiday to be celebrated by all Americans today is partially the result of the tireless effort of black cultural activists like Opal Lee, who in 2016, at the age of 89, walked from Texas to Washington, D.C., 1,400 miles, to call attention to the importance of making Juneteenth a national holiday. I didn't grow up with Juneteenth. I'm from Delaware. My people are from Virginia. I didn't grow up celebrating Juneteenth. Instead, we participated in watch night services on December the 31st to honor the Emancipation Proclamation, which took effect on January 1st. So I don't have a familial or historical connection to the holiday. Shortly after President Biden signed the proclamation of the official federal holiday, I spoke to one of my brothers and I told him I appreciated the symbolism of Juneteenth. But with the continued systemic racism in all sectors of societies, I thought it was a little, too late, a way to placate black people. And as my brother does in his wisdom, he responds to me, it may be too little, but I'll take it. And I continue to think about his response, and I've somewhat changed my stance. I'm still frustrated at the slow pace of racial justice in the country, but I've come to seeing Juneteenth as an opportunity to deal with the hard history of slavery and racism, while celebrating and honoring the resilience of a people, my people, who helped build this nation. You know, as a nation, our history of slavery and racism is complicated and unsettling for us. And it's something that many of us would like to forget. We as a nation don't like tough history. So we either tend toward simplified, often sanitized children's version of our past, or Hollywood's based on a true story version, with good guys and bad guys, a sensational plot and an easy resolution. We are often entertained and not informed. So as we attend our barbecues this week, as you go to Lynn this weekend and attend your festivities, I encourage you to think about how our freedoms today are inextricably linked to the enslavement of others in the past. And with that, I say thank you.
Don't be scared, just because I'm going to the binder. Professor, thank you so much for coming to Melrose, for the work you do at Salem State University, educating, no doubt, thousands of young and maybe not so young students about all the history of the United States. Very much appreciated, valued, and really indispensable work. I want to thank everyone here for attending, for your fellowship, for your consideration. This is one day out of 365, but one that we have all landed upon is the importance of the work continuing, the progress continuing, and I know the folks that are here will do that. So happy pre-Juneteenth, and again, thank you all very much on behalf of the city for joining us here today.